For the last session of this, last session, what a bummer. No, I think we have some really good speakers, and I wanted to introduce the session chair, Matjaž, okay, I'm going to get it wrong now, Jug, something like that. Matjaž is the head of the CIO office at Statistics Netherlands, and I think you've been there for several years now, Matjaž, but I met you when you were the CTO of the Slovenian statistical office, which was a long time ago, at an MSIS meeting, when there was still an MSIS. And he went from there to being in sort of senior management, again, I think CTO at Stats New Zealand, if I remember right. Matjaž has a reputation as being very forward-looking technology guy in the space, and very well respected. And he's always been well respected since I've run into him, which has been many, many years. And so I just wanted to hand over to you, Matjaž. And then you have to deal with these people, not me.
Thank you for very kind invitation, very kind introduction. Welcome back to the very last, content session today. This is the session, almost before you can all go and enjoy Paris Friday night, which, unfortunately, in my case, and I'm sure many of other cases, it means travel back home. But in any case, before that, we will hear 4 very interesting presentations from 5 colleagues who are sitting here. They all have something in common. Today and also yesterday, we heard a lot about the FAIR data, metadata, and data and principles. We have a manifesto, what is smart, on the web site of the conference. And one of these important, principles of smart is also active metadata. So active metadata seems to be a bit of a common topic of all these presentations. So what we decided is, because we have a very full agenda with 5 speakers, and we also have a quite coherent topic that we will have Q&A at the end. But after each session, I will remind you to kind of memorize the questions that you have. So the only other thing is each presentation will be 12 minutes, except the one that has 2 speakers will be longer, but each of them will have shorter, about 8-9 minutes each. Let's start. So I would like to introduce you the first speaker, Romain Tailhurat. So I hope that sounded approximately right.
Absolutely.
And Romain is a product manager for a survey design tool and a DDI practitioner at Insee. And his presentation doesn't only show use cases for active metadata, but also importance of sustained investment in metadata systems over the longer period of time. And enough spoilers for now. So Romain, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Matjaž, for the introduction. I hope that the most of you are not so much confused about the microphone guy being in the scene here, but I'm actually also doing stuff at Insee. So I'm a product manager for the suite of collection, metadata-driven collection for survey. The paper that I'm presenting now was written by Mylène, Thomas, and Florian, that I guess at the end of this day, most of you knows because they were all over the Cosmos conference. So I'll start with a brief history of what Hermes is. So as statistician, people at Insee were concerned with the metadata for a long time. So starting in the 80s through the start of the century, we built 2 main metadata management systems. So they were very practical, user-oriented, but in fact, they lack something that nowadays, in the modern days, you will want from a statistical tool and reference service and system. So in the early 10s, the Hermes project was launched, and I would like to convey through this presentation that it was more than a project, but much more something around, like an initiative or culture in development. And so, starting in 2018, the Hermes, the statistical metadata repository for Insee, was in production and used in many parts of the statistical processes at Insee. So, what were the objectives of Hermes, of the project? Basically, it was to centralize metadata in a way to permit harmonization and better control of metadata for the end users. Also, we wanted to standardize their description. In the previous metadata systems, there were a lot of different kind of in-house and custom models, and it was very hard to promote, how to say, linking between those models. And also, the third objective was to foster the reuse of metadata, so that's a common purpose that we all have when building such a system. And in my presentation, you won't see the word FAIR, or the acronym FAIR, but I think with this objective, we really started doing something around building FAIR metadata system, at least in-house, but also for dissemination, as I will present later. So also, we built metadata and metadata system on principles at Insee. The three principles were to use international standards. So I'm pretty sure everybody is convinced of using metadata, standardized and international metadata standards nowadays. But also, there was a focus at the start of the Hermes initiative to activate metadata. And I will give you in 1 or 2 slides the definition that we have at Insee for what is activated metadata. And the third principle was to be open, more that later. So standards. We start, in fact, with a sub-goals or sub-principle that was to not only build conceptual standardization or technical standardization, but both ends in end, because if you don't have any of the two, you will have problem with the standardization and what the benefits of standardization can bring to your organization. Also, before using concrete standards, the one that you know already, we used two, I would say, kind of meta models or overarching models that are the GSBPM and GSIM that we are presenting today, and I guess also in some presentation yesterday, that describe the GSBPM is for describing the process of producing statistics, whereas GSIM will be used to describe the objects, the entities that flows through the process. Regarding the concrete standards, we are using, I would say, three types or three families of standards. So maybe one of the most well-known is DDI lifecycle, short here DDI-L. We choose that from the get-go. I think when we choose DDI-L, it was quite new. Maybe CodeWoods was more well-known at the time, but because one of our first use was to build questionnaires, DDI lifecycle seems very well fitted for that. Also, XCOS is used for statistical classification. In the second family, the SDMX family, we are using the SIMS, so that's the single integrated metadata structure that helps for reporting activities, describing statistical operation and indicators. And also we are making a lot use of a lot of VTL that stands for the validation and transformation language. That is a language for statistical processes, but at a very high level, higher level than R, for example, or things like that. And at least the second family is another group around semantic web technologies, for example, DCAT for describing a catalog of data sets, and also SCOS for concepts and things related to that. The meat, I would say, of my presentation of the session is about activation, activated metadata. The definition, one of the definition, maybe there will be some discussion about what is actually activated metadata, but from my point of view is really use metadata actively in automated process in your IT system to keep the metadata alive and relevant. Currently at Insee, there are 4 main areas where we are activating metadata. Maybe the one that I know the most is for building questionnaires. So really metadata is produced when we are designing cross-reaching questionnaires. We are activating metadata for post-collection processes with VTL, for example, and DDI also, for ingesting administrative data and steering data dissemination. In the case of dissemination, we're using vocabulary like DataCube. So just a focus on survey collection. Really, the tools that we are building, because the rectangle that you see here are tools, open source tools that we build at Insee for designing survey collection, and at every step of this process, designing questionnaire, generate questionnaire from the metadata at the collection platform, and through the post-collection process, we are using and producing metadata. So that's what active metadata are, using your tools to consume it and produce metadata. So now for the third principle, that is to be open or openness. First, it would be around the use or the building of open source tooling, and with the sort of I would say caveats that when it's not possible to use or produce ourselves open source tool, we will use proprietary solutions. But there are other ways to be open. One of the ways to be open is to share our knowledge. That's what we are doing with this conference, for example. But also we try and we achieve, I think, contribution to the standards, to many standards and metadata standards that I presented earlier. Just a focus on what Hermes is. You already seen this graph during Alima's presentation, but basically what he said is that you have what I presented earlier, a centralized metadata system that helps users by giving the possibility to export and to consume and to produce metadata, but also it is directly linked to actual process and toolings for survey collection, for example, data dissemination. So the current state, as you may have noticed or understand from my talk, is that Hermes is already central to statistical processes, I didn't say, from beginning to end. And that metadata is part of the strategy, the quality strategy, I didn't say, around a framework like the code of practice, the European code of practice, for example. So there is a direct connection between metadata and quality for statistics. And all that we are building helps convincing data producers, because we offer service around what they will maybe manually or less rationally do in their day-to-day business. And also, so maybe I'm a bit pompous with the last point, but I'm pretty sure that we are building a metadata culture, and Insee Cosmos is one way to do that, but also internally with the internal event promotion, and also the fact that we are trying at least to keep a high level of expertise around metadata at Insee. My last slide will be about the next steps. Different things are already in the oven. The fact that we want to use to apply metadata-driven collection for collection process. For example, for describing survey protocol and automate other things around survey protocol. Also, there is the project to extend the use of GCAT for dissemination. And the last point will be about lineage. It was already mentioned several times during the conference, and more specifically, I talk a lot about data collection and dissemination, and I probably say nothing of what in the middle, the actual process of the data. And I think there are a lot of things to be done here. The work on SDTL and SDTH for that is very interesting for us. Maybe the use of GI-CDI in conjunction with VTL, for example, for our purpose. And with that, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, sorry. Fantastic. Thank you, Romain. Please remember your questions. This is very exciting, I think, presentation because it shows, activation all over statistical process, from collection to data dissemination. Now we go to the second presentation. So this will be presented by Susana Portillo Cruz from the Central Statistical Office in Ireland, and Jeremy Iverson, Colectica. So they're doing it together. So I will introduce you both at the beginning. Susana works as a statistician for the Quality Management Support and Assurance Division of the Central Statistical Office in Ireland for the last 2 years. She has been working on as the metadata librarian for the CSO and on harmonization metadata. And prior to this, she managed the transition of the CSO to process-mapped documentation and designed a metadata system for the organization. Susana has extensive experience in managing data, having led the short-term enterprise statistics unit for several years, and also analyzed and disseminated enterprise statistics. And then later we will hear Jeremy. So Jeremy is a co-founder and partner at Colectica, where he helps building software to document statistical data using open standards. Previously, he was a programmer at the Wisconsin longitudinal study, working to process, document, and disseminate data for the long-running study. Jeremy is currently an invited expert on the Data Documentation Initiative's technical committee. So, the use case is really exciting and very compelling I believe, for both statisticians and management, because first is about quality, which, statisticians care about, and the second thing is it's very difficult to be done, effectively and efficiently without the metadata. So, Susana, the stage is yours.
Thank you. It always amazes me how fast time goes when you're here, so I'll try to be quick. The outline of the presentation today is I'm going to talk about the soft side of the house, the practical side, whereas Jeremy is tasked with talking about the technical aspects of it. So, if you picture this slide, welcome to the life of a CSO statistician after statistical production has happened. They've produced the statistics, and they have to start looking at reference metadata in the form of quality reports. So they might have to compile what we call an ESMS report for Eurostat, or a USQRS/SIMS report. I think Romain has defined what SIMS means for Eurostat, or both. And then in addition to that, at national level, we require them to create a standard report on quality in Word format. They might have to produce release metrics that have to go through our management board every time that there's a publication. And there might be other reports that they have to generate, I don't know, maybe for the IMF, you name it. So as you can see, there's an awful lot of effort involved. There's loads of different reports that the statistician has to complete after statistical production. So what we wanted to try to achieve, and this idea came from talking to our colleagues in ISTAT Denmark, who had already been using Colectica for the production of the SIMS, is to have a centralized system where you can collect information on all the concepts related to the SIMS, and from those concepts, try to extract the different reports at the click of a button. So that is the idea behind our use case. So we started going about it. We've taken several steps to achieve these. The first thing that we did was to try to align the concepts that were on the SIMS with the concepts that we had at national level. And we found that there was a 90% overlap between both of them, okay? And then the 10% that was left over, some of them were in the SIMS, not in our national one, and the other way around. I suppose the majority, or there was an awful lot of concepts that were present at national level. And when we looked at the SIMS, what happened was they were included in the description for a specific concept, as in like, when you're reporting on these concepts, you should mention these, and these. But we didn't have specific concepts in SIMS for those, okay? So what we did then was, so that we wouldn't miss any of those concepts for our users of our statistics, we decided to extend the SIMS, because as we know, the SIMS was created to be extendable. And this is how we did it. So you can see in the table there how, I have some of the concepts there with a SIMS ID, SQRS ID, SMS ID, and then I have others that don't have those IDs. So for example, as the source type, if you look at the guidelines for the SIMS, it tells you to mention things about the population frame, the sample design, the survey size. So what we have done is include those as sub-concepts. The second step that we're talking in this particular project is to try and migrate our own CSO standard report into a SIMS format, okay? And what we found with that is that we had an awful lot of metadata all across different systems. Sometimes we were not saying exactly the same thing, and everything had to be harmonized and standardized into one. So we decided to populate that SIMS, CSO SIMS structure, shall we call it, okay? And to create the content for each report, we looked at the existing CSO standard reports. We looked at all the background notes that get released with every single statistical production. We look at another element that we have within our quality framework, which is what we call a methods page, which means that every single statistic we produce in the CSO, there is an associated methods page, we call it, with it, where you have certain metadata elements. And then any other source that we could find. So for example, we contacted different domains to see whether they had to generate quality reports out of their statistics for other organizations. The third step, and this step is kind of happening in parallel with the migration in step 2, is about the software development, which is the part that Jeremy will be talking about later on. In the CSO, we had been using Colectica for questionnaire design for a number of years. And like I said, Statistique Denmark, we were talking to them. They said they were using Colectica for reference metadata. So we decided to reuse the same tool rather than reinvent the wheel. So we wanted a system that integrated with Colectica and therefore is based on the DDI standard. We wanted to be able to set mandatory flags for certain concepts. We wanted to have audience-specific text in the sense that for a national report, the tables might be slightly differently named to the Eurostat transmission, so you need to have that slight difference to create one or the other report. We wanted to have rollover of the reports because there are concepts that will be repeating every iteration, so we don't want to be entering the same text again and again. And then, as you saw in the second slide, we want to be able to extract either the report for the PDF report for the CSO, or whether it's an SDMX format for your stat transmission or whatever you call it, at the click of a button, okay? The other thing that we wanted was to put some approval workflow functionality around it, and that's because reference metadata, I don't know in your organizations, but in ours always seems to be treated as an afterthought. Always happens after statistical production, and then there's very little time given to it. So at least this way, we will make sure that things are harmonized and that the reports are being kept relevant and up to date. So then the next thing is going to be the rollout and the embedding. So there's going to be a SIMS administrator looking after this software application that's going to create any required standard. And the standards, the creation of new standards is because different domains extend the SIMS themselves. So you're going to need different standards then. It's going to be based on the DDI series, studies, data collection objects, etc. And we will then, once this is all created, we will kick off the approval workflow process, at which time the report owner will kick in. They'll have to manage their own report. They will have to send it to us for approval and then extract the PDF for the national website and the SDMX for the Eurostat transmission via EDAMIS. And that is my side, so I'll pass it over to Jeremy.
Hey, thank you, Susana. Thank you, everybody, for being here this afternoon. So yeah, my name is Jeremy Iverson with Colectica, and like Susana introduced, we worked with Stats Denmark quite a while ago to develop some quality reporting systems, and more recently with CSO. So when we came into this quality reporting, we first had to learn about what is this exactly, and we learned that this is reference metadata as opposed to structural metadata. And in the European system, this means you're describing high-level, things about your statistical outputs. So things like contact information, policies, costs, and lots of other stuff. With the goal of this all being to increase the reliability, or to describe the reliability, I suppose, of the statistical outputs, and to provide a consistent form for reporting. So we had been working with DDI for quite a while before this, and those two goals are kind of similar to generally what you get out of standardized metadata, doing things consistently and describing your processes and the contents of the actual results openly. So we looked at a few standards. We've been using DDI, of course. DDI lifecycle, there's some 40 or so actual content items that you can describe, things like data sets and variables and surveys and questions and code lists and classifications and some other things too. We looked at SIMS because that's what you use in Europe, of course, to do this reporting. That has 19 high-level concepts, 80 total sub-concepts. And there's a bit of overlap there between sort of the statistical life cycle information that DDI lets you record and what SIMS requires you to report. So that's nice to have the kind of complementary or overlapping content within those standards. And finally, there's STMX, which the European agencies use for reporting to Eurostat all of this information. So the approach we took is we started with SIMS and all the definitions of that. We record all this information in DDI. So DDI provides a few item types that are useful for this. We use the quality standard, which was newly introduced in DDI lifecycle, I think 3.3, perhaps 3.2. We also use concept schemes and concepts and the compliance definitions that are part of the quality standards. And so we use all of those DDI elements and properties to define SIMS in DDI. This is nice because you can also add extra concepts, extra compliance definitions. For example, Susana mentioned she had the custom or CSO only items that they record. And so you can use SIMS purely by itself, or you can extend it with extra information if you want to. Going from there, you can record the actual quality statements using DDI quality statements, which are nicely named. And then from there, you can generate the STMX reporting documents, as well as PDF files or Word files, or put it on the web, all from the same source of quality statement. So Susana covered, I think, most of this information. I guess I just go into a little bit more detail on one or two of the features that are here. So the pre-filling of information from DDI metadata, that can be customly mapped from various DDI elements, whether you're using study units or groups or anything else. Those can be mapped into the different SIMS properties. You can also map from internal databases or other data sources that you might have. There's an add-in framework to perform those kind of custom mappings into SIMS. She talked about rollovers and access control already. So yeah, I think I'll skip the rest of that because it's been covered. Just have a couple screenshots to sort of show the system, not in action, but what it looks like anyway. This is kind of the navigation page. So on the left side, there's a hierarchy of statistical themes and topics, and at the lowest level are the actual statistical outputs. So for a given year, the pig survey in this case. And you can click to edit the quality statement, or if one doesn't exist yet, you'd be able to create a new one or roll it over from the previous year if there was one from the previous year. Going into the editor for the quality statement, there's a few things going on the screen. So across the top, these are the GSBPM phases. So you can see everything, or you can filter all of the SIMS elements by specify needs, collection, processing, analysis, whatever the phases are that you're interested in. Below that, there's a progress indicator. So you can see what percentage am I done with all of the elements, what percentage have I done with the required elements. So you get a nice view of how much work you have left to do. And then over on the left side, in the main area, you have all of the different SIMS concepts and sub-concepts. Select one, you get to edit it and put the content in there. And there's indicators in the navigation to show which items already have content or which items need content, which items are required, and all of that. So yeah, you go through, you fill it out, you hit save, and then when it's done, you can send it for approval, for review and publication. So I think the neat thing about the screen is, this is the SIMS editor as we're seeing it, but I described how we configure this in DDI. So it's actually a configurable metadata entry form that if you don't use SIMS, if you're not a European agency, or if you have other information you want to record, you can configure that with whatever sort of content you want. You can also define the mapping of that content to whatever output you want. So in the case of SIMS, for the European agencies, we map it to the SDMX reporting structures, but you could also map it out to whatever other standard or whatever other format you might like. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Susana for a conclusion.
Thanks. Yeah, so just one last slide to let you know about what we think are the benefits for us of this project. So first of all, it's going to be easier to update all reports. We're going to have a central repository of all the quality reports that we have to produce in the CSO. We're going to have the same information being put out there regardless of what report, which is not what's happening now. We have found discrepancies between different reports that refer to actually the same reference period. We're going to be able to put quality controls in place for the dissemination of the reports just to make sure that the information is correct and that whatever information is included in the report is relevant for the concept that is contained in it. And then our published reports will have a consistent look and feel, so our users will be able to see straight away that it's been a report produced by the CSO. There was one slide that I didn't put in there, which is the next steps, right? And a colleague from the OECD earlier on was mentioning something about timeliness, punctuality, and so on and so forth. So those are concepts within the SIMS. And I suppose we will be completing them as part of our quality reporting. What we're hoping in the future is to be able to extract, say, the management dashboards from the SIMS so that you can look at those quality performance indicators included in the SIMS and create the dashboards out of that, and then maybe action whether you need to continue with with the collection or do something else. And what was the other thing that I had in mind? Sorry, it's gone because I didn't put the slide. Yeah, no, we'll leave it there because it's gone.
Maybe something for later in the discussion.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Susana and Jeremy. And yeah, we have now the third presenter, so Grazia Di Bella from ISTAT, and she will talk about active metadata to produce administrative data quality documentation. So it's again about the quality, but this time about more different part of statistical process, I guess. And the other thing which is really interesting is also that metadata is, of course, equally or even more important for administrative data sources, not just traditional data sources. Grazia Di Bella has a PhD in statistics since 1996. She has been working in the National Statistical Institute of Statistics in Rome. In the first period, she was involved in environmental statistics production, in particular redesign of the surveys for the production of statistics on water use based on national needs and the harmonization of international statistics. In the second period, she has been involved in the administrative data management sector to enhance their reuse for the production of statistics. Currently, she works in the data collection directorate, and she is responsible for the documentation of the administrative data management and quality acquired by ISTAT for statistical purposes. Yeah, Grazia, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Matjaž. Thank you, everybody. I'm presenting now the ISTAT experience about the the management of the sector of the management of administrative data collected by ISTAT for statistical purposes, and the possibility that we had to build a reporting system of administrative data using metadata of the management process without additional costs. I will talk about the ISTAT scenario, the reusing data, standardizing processes, reporting quality standards, and I will present the quality report card of administrative data QRCA, and some functions and some conclusions. What the ISTAT scenario, we had the modernization process, and so we have a unique data collection directorate that is in charge of the data collection both from survey data and administrative data. About survey data, we have multiple systems due to the different types of survey methods, and also we are ongoing in the transition towards a complete IT standardization of collection processes. But in the administrative sector, since the centralization process was already active in previous the modernization, we have almost all the collection standardized and centralized. Only some data are outside decentralization, for example, macro data or data that require specific acquisition from the IT point of view. And so we have that nearly the 60% of the statistical processes in ISTAT use administrative data. And so we acquired data from 60 administrative source holders and from 226 sources. And so we manage 712 supplies every year that are annually, monthly, and so on. And so we have two main IT systems that manage all this huge amount of data. That is the IT acquisition system and the IT treatment system, ARCAM and SIM. So the task is to document this data to guarantee their quality and to support the administrative staff that is engaged in the administrative management, and also the statisticians who use this data for their process. And also for all the internal users that want to innovate their process using administrative data. And so the information to be reported is complex. We have quality indicators that have been to produce for many data sets. The characteristics of the data sets are very different among each other. And they are a huge amount of data, and often we have personal data in this data set. And so we have to have to be compliant with the data protection legislation, GDPR. So decentralization is the first step to open the possible reuse of process metadata. And so we analyzed the metadata available in these IT tools. And so in the ARCAM system, we have metadata that manage the relationships with the holders and manage the acquisition process. In the system of integrated microdata, this is the name of SIM, we have metadata for the ETL procedures and also metadata of the pretreatment process that is mainly the pseudonymization process that allows us to be compliant with the GDPR. And so we have a pretreatment, a centralized pretreatment of all the administrative data before they are used of each domain process. And so with the aim of using all these metadata and make them active, we made interoperable these two IT systems that were independent, and so we organized entities and relationships, and we create a linkage between them, and so in this way it has been possible to build the entire cycle of the administrative data collection that, considering the GS-BPM process, is from collection to integration phase. And the second operation was the standardization of the metadata to make them usable for the requirements of quality reporting. Obviously, we pay attention to not impact with the primary function of the metadata. And so, as regarding the new requirements of administrative data quality reporting, we considered some international standards and some best practices that we had the opportunity to experience in ISTAT. And after this analysis, we define 107 theoretical measures to describe the quality of administrative data. The quality of administrative data are a little bit different from the quality of the output of the statistics process, because you can imagine that they are produced outside the institute, and so it is important to report about all this life cycle. And so the strategy adopted was to reusing this data, and with the aim of automatically updating the reports each time an action in the management of the process was carried out. For example, new source acquired, and so on. In this way, the QRCA reports are updated in real time, and accessing data, you can see the reports updated. And considering the initial 107 measures, we managed to implement 60 measures because we had information available from the IT tools to calculate these indicators and information. And so we, in general, use also other sorts of metadata, Arkham and SIM, I've just said, but also the SIM Oracle Data Dictionary of the database in which data are collected, and also the National Statistical Program that allows us to take the information about the connection from the sources and the process, and also some information from our reporting system of the quality of the output of statistics. And so the QRCA components are a website built with a generalized Java application, and then we have a visual analytic platform, MicroStrategy, and an Oracle DB with as the views of the DB of the sources, and some transcoding tables and other procedures that help MicroStrategy to calculate the measures. And then colleagues, I don't know if I said, but this is an internal system that make this information available from a producer, statistics producer point of view. And so colleagues can access of this information, and then if they want access to the data, they must forward a specific request, following which specific views are made available in compliance with the data protection law. And this is, in general, the quality framework we adopt for describing the quality of administrative data. We have a system with 3 hyperdimensions that are source, metadata, and data. And in each hyperdimension, we have some quality dimension that are, in some cases, the same of the output of the statistics. In our case, are specific of the administrative data. For example, the technical checks of the data, or the integrability of the data quality dimension. And, okay, I am Harry. And we have two ways to access the QRCA. The first one is the search of an administrative variables. Users can type a keyword and then they can see among 2027 variables, which are the variables in which that keyword is included, and so they can access the source that has that variable. Or the other way to access to the QRCA is typing some keywords of the number of the holders or the number of the administrative data source, and then it can choose the source and access 19 reports that have these 60 measures. And now I show you some screenshot from the QRCA. And for example, here's the vehicle fleet, and we document the presence of the personal data or special categories. If we apply pre-treatment, that is the pseudonymization procedure for which kind of units, if are individuals or economic units, here available, the time series available. This, for example, is the report of the relevance for the employer's monthly contribution declaration, and we can see here that this source is used by 26 different processes that use the same source. So this is an important indicator that make us we have to know that we depend, 26 different processes depend on this source of the acquisition. And we are the National Registry of University Students. The content of each files they send us. The pensioner registers the monitoring of the acquisition process, and so some quality indicators about the integration of the data, so the linking variables and the linking procedures monitoring. Some conclusion is that as experienced advantages of using metadata, you have to consider that all this information was not known only by the managers and by the statisticians who use their own source. In this way, we make available for all the researchers this information. And decentralization is an important point because this is the first step. In perspective, we would like to document also the input of the processes from a multi-source point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Grazia. Very, very interesting. Yeah, let's go to the last presentation. I think, so this will be done by Dan Gillman from US Department of Labor. And yeah, Dan has been so active in metadata community that it's almost heretic to introduce him in an event like that, but I will do it anyway. Dan works for the Office of Survey Methods Research at the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. His research interests include metadata, standards, terminology, interoperability, and transparency. For 3 years, ending in October 2023, he worked as metadata consultant to the Office of Data Governance of the US Department of Labor. There, he designed and helped build a metadata system for DOL datasets based on the DDI cross-domain integration standard. Overall, Dan has decades experience designing metadata standards, building terminological systems, and consulting with program offices at BLS and DOL to build metadata systems. Yeah, Dan.
Thank you,
It is yours.
Matjaž. So, as the introduction said, I worked on a consultancy to the Department of Labor for 3 years, and this kind of reports that work. BLS is a Department of Labor agency, but everything that BLS does is independent of the rest of what DOL produces, and you'll get to see a little bit of the extent of the way the rest of the agencies produce data. So the Department of Labor has over 20 agencies, including BLS, and they're devoted to different aspects of measuring or assisting the labor force. 5 of those agencies are enforcement agencies, and what they do is they seek compliance of labor laws at business establishments, and they produce data on the inspections that they conduct for public use. Until now, the existing metadata was quite sparse and not all that good. There are also a number of policy agencies. The policy agencies are devoted to overseeing programs for improving working conditions among the workforce. And so each of the agencies produces data either about, for the policy, what the programs do, or for the enforcement agencies for the inspections. Enforcement itself, punishment is not the goal, compliance is the goal. So in DOL, there's the Office of Data Governance, headed by Chief Data Officer. This office is independent of the CIO, which is good because data governance is really not the same thing as what the CIO office does. In general, the work is devoted to improving the fairness and quality of the data sets that the department produces. And the work has been done with a multi-stage approach with very small budget, no mandate. Everything that's been built has been done with very small steps and generating an enormous amount of goodwill. For anyone that knows me, you know that I wasn't the person generating the goodwill. So what we've done is create a strategy consisting of layers. So we've built an inventory for all the data sets that the department produces. Those include both public, restricted, and private use data. We have an API to the data sets that are publicly available, and a portal that has information and guides people to the various data sets and how to use the API. To describe the data, we've had to create a metadata framework, which we've done in 3 layers. The top is the metadata for describing the entries in the EDI. There's a middle layer that looks at the content of the data at the data set level. And then at the bottom layer, we have metadata for describing the variables. And this is based on the instance variable idea in CDI. So a little bit about the metadata at for the EDI. We have typical elements: agency, contact, dataset name, etc. At the mid-level, we have things like the geographic coverage and detail, the classification systems that are in use, the unit types associated with the records in the data set, applicable laws that are in place and justifying why the data exists, and something about the structure of the data. At the lower level for variables, we have the typical descriptors, universe, data type. We have two different kinds of data type, the application, the data type of how the data is stored, the intended data type, which is how you're intended to use the data, the definition of the variable, range limits if there's a numeric range, unit to measure, precision, and then descriptions of the value domain, so the structure of the domain, the allowed value description, and the type, whether it's substantive, the subject matter values in the value domain, or sentinel, which has to do with processing. So, in addition, we also include some summary statistics for each of the variables in each of the data sets. If the variable is numeric, then we have a min, the first quartile, mean, median, third quartile, and max. For categorical, the percentages based on the top 10 categories in the enumeration. And then, because the data are not very well managed, we discovered that there are a lot of entries in many of the data sets that just don't make sense. You can't interpret them. So for instance, the industry code, the NAICS code associated with the establishments, a very large percentage of those codes are uninterpretable. They're not NAICS codes, even though they might look like them. So in order to understand and use the data, you have to know which values you might encounter that are nonsense. And we also have it so that the managers of these data sets can start to clean them up. The metadata that we've produced is intended to be active, all machine interpretable. We've used controlled vocabularies in many of the elements. Regular expressions for describing text and identifiers, numeric ranges which are interpretable as integer, real, or currency, categories linked to concepts and enumerations, and the codes clearly differentiated from their meanings. And we're using the metadata to drive some of the issues around the quality of these data sets. So the agencies don't take time to ensure that the data have a lot of quality. It's not their most important aspect of doing business. For BLS, of course, we produce data. That's why we're there. The DOL agencies exist for other purposes. So what we're trying to do is institute some quality checks for finding errors in the data. And then the valueless entries, as I described, are part of the list of information that we provide to help users understand what's going on. So some of the data quality is range checks, consistency checks, and we're also instituting geocoding and address standardization to help identify where the establishments are in a regular way. We do not have the ability to impose an identifier on each of the business establishments because the business register that BLS has to remain confidential. And so some of this activity about not having consistent identifiers is a real problem because one of the issues that that management at the department wants to know is what establishments are repeat offenders, especially across different kinds of enforcement. and it's not something that we can really do. Standardizing on address is a great idea, but the problem is that sometimes establishments move, sometimes establishments change hands at the same address. So it's really hard to follow this just based on address. So I flew through that. If there are questions, I guess you can ask me later.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I suggest now that I just go there and Romain comes to my seat for a start. Start here. Yeah, you can hear me. Great. Yeah, so thank you all for presentations, and now it's time for questions. So who wants to start? Oh, yeah.
Here, Barbara Magagna from GoFair Foundation. I have a question to the first speaker. You were talking about active metadata, making the whole process active. And yeah, I don't know how much this is, how flexible this is, but I just wanted to make you aware there are systems where you can produce surveys that are fair from the very beginning. So they are associated to ontologies, to controlled vocabularies, everything from there. You can create the questions in a fair way, and the output is automatically fair and active. So I just want to say there's Data Stewardship Wizard as an example, a company from the Czech Republic, but it works really well for any kind of survey.
Okay, thank you for the information, but I guess that's what we are trying to do with our tools. Once again, when we start the Hermes project initiative, etc., I think FAIR was not something real, or at least it was not existing in the wild. So what I would like to convey through my presentation, that we were already fairness, fair whatever, but the intention was to be fair, at least internally at first, and then for our external user at the end. So yes, maybe we don't deserve a fair stamp on our tool that we are producing, but basically that's what we are trying to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, more questions. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question for Susana and Jeremy. I'm Alicia Nieto from Statistics Spain, and I think that we are facing similar problems regarding quality indicators on reference metadata, I think. If I understood it correctly, you introduce the quality indicators on SIMs in Colectica once they have been calculated before on your own software, but not in Colectica. Okay. Okay. I don't know if you calculate it manually or automatically, but I would like to ask you if you are thinking about getting that calculated automatically and then introduce them into Colectica, but without human intervention, you know, because... Okay.
Sure. Yeah, so we do, I mentioned we had like the add-in idea for mapping content from various databases or from DDI into the SIMS quality statements. I think we call those metadata gatherers. So yes, that is something that's present even in the Denmark one, and I think the CSO folks use it because where there are common DDI properties that obviously map to a certain SIMS thing, yeah, that could be sort of built in. And automated, it depends on your workflow. You know, when is the statement created? That's usually when that mapping takes place. So if the statement creation is automated at some point or during the rollover, then yeah, that can be automated.
The question is because in Statistics Spain we calculated a kind of not manually, but more or less, and it would be perfect to have a tool that automates that part and introduces that information in the SIMS reference metadata report without an intervention.
Yeah, and that was the exact goal of this project, is that if you're already recording that information, why do it again? Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, more questions? Is there a hand there? No? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for Romain, I noticed that you were creating this metadata-driven data collection system. Is part of that system going to include the collection of paradata about the collection process?
It's fair that you are reminding me that before leaving my current position, I have to do that because, yes, that's a part of the backlog of the product. So yes, paradata, sorry, is anyone not familiar with what paradata is? So maybe I should start with the definition. So paradata is data that you collect documenting the process of your collection. For example, the timing of questions, or things like that, what the user device is. So I won't give you a perfect definition of it, but that's the idea. So yes, definitely we would do that. I think what is hidden in your question is what kind of standards we would use maybe for capturing and documenting this. I know from, 2 days ago, I learned that there is a DDI, or there was a DDI Paradata working group, so maybe there is something to be done in DDI around standardizing the way we capture Paradata, so yes, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, any new questions coming? Yeah, otherwise I have one question for Grazia. So in terms of the indicators which you use in the data collection process, do you have them the way how you can reuse this metadata for, for the quality reports, downstream the process? Like the kinds of SIMS examples that we have seen in other presentations?
Yes, we trying to consider all the indicators that was present in the standard, considering the quality of the input of the process, and so we try to implement this kind of indicators. And also we suggest to statistics producing processes to use the reports of the QRCA to document their input. And so it is an help for them to document the input of the process.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And a question for Dan. I understand that you were, part of the group that actually that developed the DDI CDI, if I'm correct. And yeah, now using it in practice, how do you, because it's not often that creator of standard, or somebody who helped create the standard is using it very immediately on the use case that is perfect use case for this standard. How do you see it's working in practice, and what do you think it should be in the next version?
Well,
based on that.
I'm taking some poetic license by saying that we're using CDI. Essentially, we took the description of an instance variable and all the attributes up the cascade, and essentially created a description for each of the DOL variables. But we did something that is a little bit different, because what we decided to do was to sort of standardize the value domains by moving some of the description that's normally on the value domain to the variable. So for instance, if there's a variable that has a range, then rather than creating a new range value domain for every different pair of minimum and maximum, we put the minimum and maximum on the description of the variable, which is really maybe where it belongs, and just basically said the value domain is a generic range. And so in that way, we've greatly reduced the number of value domains that we need to maintain. And part of the reason is there are an enormous number of variables that count employees or count accidents or this and that and the other thing. There's a lot of monetary amounts that are collected and some other things. And so rather than having hundreds of value domains because the ranges are different, we greatly reduced it. All this is in the paper.
Yeah, thank you. I think meanwhile we have a question from the audience. Yeah, there.
Yes, I have a question for Romain. You said that you provide data producers with services so that they are happy with the burden of generating metadata. What kind of services do you provide them?
I think one of the highlights here would be around SIMS, I guess, because for data producers there are obligations, I would say, to document through Europe, or at least for Eurostat, to describe their operation, to give quality indicators and things like that. So the idea was to use our own metadata collection tool to harmonize the way we describe those kind of things in order to be reusable, not only to produce SIMs, but only to produce French, for example, document for the statistical label committees that exist in France, for example, or web documentation or whatever. So that's the kind of service that helps people reducing the burden, because as was already mentioned, you don't want to have many ways to produce the same information. You want a centralized and harmonious way to capture this information and reuse it for all the needs. So that's one of the things that we done. There are other things, but this one is maybe one of the highlights. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Yeah, more questions. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I have a question for Grazia. So actually, maybe it's not about metadata per se, but I wonder what happened to the quality reporting, because it seemed almost like an internal purpose. Does it go back to the administrative source owner to say, yeah, this part was a problem, and then do you try to fix, improve quality based on this quality reporting that could happen very a systematic way?
Yes, this system is internal to the National Institute of Statistics, so the providers didn't see this system, but in any case, the reports are very useful to outline which are the problems in that source, and so they are used in the meeting when we speak, sorry for that, with the owners to better analyze the situation. For example, if there are too many missing variables, or for example, in the linking variable, that is a very big problem, and so on. And so it's useful also in that case, but they don't access directly to the system.
Thank you. Yeah, any last question? Otherwise, I have just a very short statement at the end. No? Yeah, I would just like to say, Arfan mentioned MSIS conference, and there was also METIS conference, by the way, which this is kind of, I think, reincarnation in a way. So it was 15 years ago, let's say. And the other interesting thing is that in these times, the actionable metadata, but we didn't call it that way. Were very popular topic, and we called it metadata-driven systems. And in NSOs, we try to develop generic, highly automated system entirely or mostly based on metadata. And some of these projects were successful. There were cases of, statistical office in Latvia, and some other cases, but also a lot of these projects were unsuccessful. So they kind of generated difficult to manage systems or didn't deliver. So what is different now when we talk about actionable and active data? So we have FAIR, for example, that we didn't have in these times. So from that perspective, it helps. But maybe, yeah, the last comment, is there anything that you see now we can progress faster to have this metadata really in an actionable form? Romain, maybe if you start, or Dan, who was there at the meetings.
Well, as you were talking, Matjaž, I was reminded that it was Statistics Netherlands that wrote a paper in the late 90s that talked about active and passive metadata.
Right.
It would be hard for me to comment on that, but maybe a way to seeing it is you have to fail sometimes a lot in order to success. So I won't say that our solution and what we built was always successful. There were hard times and difficult times to promote the vision and to in fact incarnate it through actual statistical processes. So maybe just a factor of time to finally success and the wills of some person to carry the burden or to carry the vision. So yeah, maybe that's just it.
Yeah. Thank you, Romain, for providing this insight, and thank you all presenters for your presentations, and audience for very nice and relevant questions.